Senator Duckworth.
Thank you, Mr. President. I appreciate it. As we consider this bill, what's interesting to me is when it comes to the $40 million, we're looking to take or divert that $40 million from a very specific fund. And so as I was researching the bill and preparing to have some conversation about it and ask questions about it, one of the first questions I asked is, well, why does this fund even exist in the first place? Why is there a fund of over $100 million in existence that we're looking to take $40 million from? Well, it has to do with something called the Tyler settlement. And how or why did that even come about? Well, the Tyler settlement came about because the government took more from people than it should have because it thought it knew better. It was so eager for more of the people's money that it unlawfully stole tens of millions of dollars from them. So bad and so much so that the courts had to step in, rule in favor of the people, and demand that they be made whole. The legislature set aside money to do so. And as I familiarized myself with that case and the money that was set aside to make people whole because the government took more from them than it should have, it reminded me of where things stand today. And I'm left asking if the legislature, if the state government here in Minnesota has learned any lessons. A $19 billion surplus gone, $10 billion more in taxes, growing a budget by $20 billion or 40%, billions of dollars in fraud, in a $6 billion deficit. And here we stand as a legislature trying to take money set aside to make people whole who the government already stole from and divert it to a wholly new purpose that quite frankly might not be right for fraud itself. So unfortunately, Mr. President, I don't think we have learned many lessons. We certainly haven't learned the lessons that Minnesotans are demanding that we finally address when it comes to fraud and rampant spending and overtaxation in the state of Minnesota. What's interesting too, Mr. President, is there are no shortage of critical issues here in the state of Minnesota that could definitely use a $40 million investment. Education comes to mind first and foremost. So I'm left wondering, what is the difference between all the other issues that Minnesotans would love us to see address with a $40 million investment and this issue? Well, the difference, Mr. President, is this. None of those issues, no matter how critical they may be, have been deemed politically advantageous to make headlines with. And that's the unfortunate reality, Mr. President. The people of Minnesota are tired of their hard-earned dollars being spent in ways in which are not a priority for the state, for them, for their families. They're tired of seeing billions of their hard-earned tax dollars go toward fraud. And here we are doing more of the same potentially. If we don't learn these lessons very quickly, Mr. President, the harm that has been caused will certainly be unfixable. And so I ask members, as we continue this session, and you're prioritizing bills and spending and investments in the state, ask first, what's most important to the people of Minnesota? What are we doing to fix the issues that we have? And how are we working every single day to make sure they keep more of their hard-earned money versus the government continuing to take more of it? Thank you.
Senator Kunis.
Thank you, Mr. President. I rise to support this bill and to ensure that these funds that were ill-begotten by the state in order to now have a balance that can go towards doing good. I think it's important to recognize that the work that we are doing here today is work that we have done in the past. We have stepped up at different times to address emergencies and issues that affect unique groups of people here in Minnesota. They talked today about ambulance service and how we were able to afford dollars to support them. We are constantly helping our farmers and agriculture when there is a shortfall. When there are natural disasters such as flooding and communities that need assistance in dealing with those kind of tragedies, Minnesota stands up. We've looked at unemployment with our miners up north when they needed assistance in making sure that they were able to pay their rent and put food on their tables and also make sure that their children have what they need. And now we have that opportunity to do it again. I represent districts that have high levels of hurt because of ice surge. We saw in Columbia Heights and Fridley and the other communities the terrorizing that happened when we were besieged by thousands of agents in our community. And that had an effect over and over again in so many different ways. In Fridley alone, they came together to assist their communities and their neighbors, especially when our children were being sieged under by ICE. But so far, since Metro Urge, just the rental assistance that our community has pooled together in one source, over $31,000 and $8,000 in utility assistance. And that's not counting any other assistance outside, and the need is still there. In our manufactured home community, we've seen no leniency from the corporate-owned community that we have there. And so we found couples and families living in cars with no place to go because there's no place for couples. They lost their place because they weren't able to continue to pay their rent. Over 500 families in just in Columbia have been helped through mutual aid, GoFundMe, with partial rent. But it keeps coming. Those requests keep coming. From a Fridley resident with Heights kids, she's been traumatically pulled over by ICE vehicles multiple times in convoy style. Traumatizing events that she's experienced. She's been the person who has collected keys from abandoned cars from detained individuals. She has trauma response, unable to go to work. Her spouse is afraid to leave the house. They've gone from being small business owners and full-time workers to neither working for the past 2 months. This kind of mutual aid, this kind of aid that we can provide here today is going to make all the difference in my community. Because of no ill-begotten efforts from my community, we are suffering at the highest levels. And so today I ask for your support in passing this rental assistance and making the best effort to make some of these people whole. Thank you.
Senator Liskey.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, I rise in opposition to this bill for a couple of reasons. One, Senator Duckworth pointed out where this money is coming from and what it was supposed to be used for, and we're now changing the purpose of that money, which isn't okay. The hard taxpayers of Minnesota are seeing this, and there's a lot of strain and struggle going through our state. It's not just for one reason, it's not just for one operation, it's not just for one thing. There are a lot of things that we've made decisions on here in the state of Minnesota that have led to our taxpayers struggling. And what's even worse is we had an opportunity as a group to vote to remove access to these benefits from predatory offenders, and yet we watched the body vote against that. We had the opportunity to vote to protect taxpayers from funding things that we probably shouldn't fund in the first place, and yet we voted against it because of partisan politics or things of disagreement, thinking that it would not get to the people it shouldn't get to. Well, imagine that. Here in Minnesota, we're proposing a type of program that could be rampant with fraud. There's not a lot of requirements to prove that you benefit or should get this money. And so with that, I urge a no vote. Thank you, Mr. President.
Senator Clark.
Thank you, Mr. President. Body, I ask you and urge you to vote yes on this. We've seen all winter neighbors helping neighbors. Neighbors standing up and doing, well, what needed to be done to make sure that neighbors were able to stay in their homes, to be safe in the streets. And that's what we're doing today. We're taking the next step. We're joining folks like Tom and Kathy. We're joining folks like Zaid, who stepped up and said, I will make sure that my neighbor can pay their rent. And today it's time for the Minnesota Senate to say, well, we can put some of our money in here as well, to put in the hard-earned tax dollars to keep folks in their homes. That's what Minnesotans do. That's what neighbors do. That's what we do to make sure that we stick up and say that this is a North Star state. So I urge a yes vote on this bill. Thank you, Mr. President.
Senator Wiesenberg. Senator Wiesenberg.
Thank you, Mr. President. I rise in opposition to this bill. I heard, we're giving free housing because people are afraid to leave their houses and go to work. I think there's a bigger thing here. We've got 8.6 billion people in the world, and Minnesotans think we should bring them all here, and we should pay for them to be here so we can buy their votes. Senator Chuck Schumer just said verbatim, the Save America Act allows ICE to kick tens of millions of people off the voter rolls. These people aren't American citizens, Mr. President. They're illegal citizens. So I rise to oppose this Rent for Riots bill. At least that's what I call it up in my district. If you read the title of this bill, it sounds very compassionate. Emergency rental assistance. But I sat in my hotel room last night watching the discussions of this bill as I went through committees, and I tell you this is opposite of compassionate, at least for the hardworking people of my district, Mr. President, who would be forced to pay for it. Because when you create a giant pot of taxpayer money to pay people's rent with loose definitions and very little accountability, you're sending a signal across the state. Don't worry about the consequences. Someone else will pick up the tab. And guess who that someone else is? Mr. President, it's the auto mechanic in Brainerd. It's the truck driver from Aiken. It's the bar owner in Little Falls who's just trying to keep the lights on after his business was devastated by Tim Walz's reckless COVID policies. Mr. President, hardworking Minnesotans who pay their bills every month are now expected to pay for the rent of folks who don't. Every one of us here has compassion for people who fall in hard times, but compassion does not mean writing a blank check from the taxpayers of Minnesota, and it certainly doesn't mean rewarding chaos. Over the last few years, we've seen what happens when lawlessness takes over, when riots break out, when businesses burn, when neighborhoods are torn apart. The people who suffer the most aren't politicians, Mr. President. It's the shop owners, it's the workers, the families who built something with their bare hands. Yet here we are debating a bill that effectively says, if things go sideways, the taxpayers will cover the rent anyway. That's why my constituents back home have started calling this the Rents for Riots bill, because the government keeps bailing out bad behavior, and when they do that, you only invite more of it. And let's talk about another issue that nobody on the other side seems eager to mention. When you create large public benefit programs with minimal guardrails, you open the door for abuse, included by people who aren't even supposed to be here in the first place. Now, my own
worth of billionaires go up
party who said publicly this is retribution. Would that be okay with you? I think the answer is no. And therefore, I ask you to say, what are we doing? We have the ability to help. Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you, members. Appreciate the debate. We have to face a few facts here. The bill comes out of a need. And for my brothers and sisters who are from Greater Minnesota, let's not make any mistake. This will help our communities. Greater Minnesota incomes are lower, the housing needs are greater, and this fills a need right now. I'll be a yes vote on the bill. And I don't like to get too political on the floor for my friends across the aisle, but I want to remind you what the President of the United States said when the Metro Surge started. He said, this is retribution. And I'd ask you, each one of you who I like and respect, If a president from a different party said that, and then we had happen what happened here in Minneapolis, people killed, homes wrecked, businesses hurt, families done, what would you be saying? Would you have the same response here on the floor of the Minnesota Senate if this was done by a president from your party who said publicly this is retribution? Would that be okay with you? I think the answer is no. And therefore, I ask you to say, what are we doing? We have the ability to help rural communities. We have the ability to help families, and we have the ability to help them right now, and we should. Thank you, Mr. President.
Senator Jasinski.
Thank you, Mr. President. Again, going back to earlier testimony, or testimony you want to call it, but people talking, Senator Draheim hit it. I met with all my counties before I came up here this year, most of them in December and January. And not one of my counties, I have 4, not one county said this is a need, not one. They had a lot of other priorities, paid family leave, all kinds of different things that are going on in their communities and counties. Not one brought this up, not one. I know Senator French as well was in Finance Committee and said not one of his counties requested this either. We're hearing that from lots of our members, that not any of our counties are requesting it. It's not a priority. I think Senator Drazkowski also had made point. I think this was an organized effort to people told by the Democrats not to work, not to do these things, to prove a point. I remember our governor, Governor Walz, after ICE was announced he was coming here, he said, it's your civic duty to get out and protest. Your civic duty to get out and protest. That includes blowing whistles, yelling, screaming, spitting at our law enforcement. Now, I was an air traffic controller in the Navy for 4 years. And when I did my job and tried to keep airplanes in the sky, if I had somebody blowing a whistle, spitting, and screaming at me while I was trying to control airplanes, do you think things might have not been the best? That's what law enforcement was put on their plate when our Governor Walz said it's your civic duty to get out and protest. That's what he said. It's on the news. I watched it. So do you think that might have created an issue here in Minnesota? I believe it did. So this bill, again, is not a priority in any of my counties and many others. Putting a program together that is going to extend the waste, fraud, and abuse that we've seen in the state over many, many years. I remember my first bill on waste, fraud, and abuse was, I think, in 2018 with the Child Care Assistance Program and the fraud that was being done then. And when I'm in my district, the 2 things I hear, what is going on with the waste, fraud, and abuse? Why can't you as a legislator, my legislator, get that under control? Why can't you stop it? And they're mad. And I think there's a lot of people in both Republican and Democrat districts that are very upset because the money being wasted, the fraud, and the abuse are raising their property taxes on top of the $40 million, the increase that we had, the $19 billion surplus we had, the $10 billion increase of about 39.7% in state government, the largest increase in state spending in our history. And when they look at the bottom line of their property taxes and they're going up 15 and 20% and they can't afford it, they're frustrated. This is just another program that is going to be so susceptible to waste, fraud, and abuse. Members, vote no.
Senator Gustafson.
Thank you, Mr. President. In the last year and a half, the federal government has made life more expensive for Minnesotans. From the cost of housing, the cost of gas, the cost of groceries, it's all gone up. This bill is a way to help Minnesotans deal with the chaos of the federal government's actions. Senate File 3596 helps working families get through a short-term financial crisis without losing their housing. When a parent faces a sudden medical bill, a job disruption, or another unexpected expense, the risk of eviction can rise quickly. When that happens, it is children who experience the greatest disruption, losing stability, changing schools, facing uncertainty at home. This bill provides limited, targeted assistance through counties and tribal governments to help families stay housed during those difficult moments. This bill addresses affordability. It also makes sense to be proactive. Preventing an eviction is far less expensive than responding after a family becomes homeless, when communities must absorb the cost of their shelters, services, and school disruption. So by helping working Minnesota families stay on their feet and protect stability for children, Senate File 3596 addresses a problem early, avoids much larger costs later, and helps provide some relief to Minnesotans who are just trying to survive the federal government's agenda. I encourage a green vote.
Senator Gruenhagen.
Well, thank you, Mr. President. Yeah, I rise in opposition to this bill. I know that probably surprises some of you. No, for a host of reasons, I'll cover just a few of them. You know, one of the things to understand, there are economic laws, okay? And when you increase the size of government by 40% in a 2-year period, you raise taxes another 9 to 10 billion, no matter how well-meaning, that is an expense on the private sector. It drives up the cost of housing. It drives up the cost of rent. It drives up a host of other things. Usually it hurts the low income people the most. So unfortunately, that's what the Democratic Party doesn't understand. They don't believe there's economic laws. They think they can grow government, at 40% plus raise taxes another 9 to 10 billion. I have asked plenty of my people in my district, did your income go up in 2 years 40%? Nobody ever said yes. And yet they're expected to pay the taxes in to support all this. You can't grow government without hurting people, especially low-income people, when you grow government faster than the private sector. That's an economic law, whether you like it or not. It's like gravity. Secondly, we've heard quite a bit of rhetoric about the federal government. Well, members, if we look at this bill, and especially the Lucero Amendment about lawful citizens, when you vote that down and therefore make it available to people who are here illegally, the thing you understand, you're threatening federal match. That's what you're doing. In fact, when we look at the state of Minnesota, because we have resisted the federal government in so many areas, we're having more millions of dollars frozen. So you're endangering, the very bill you have is endangering federal funding. And the result is it's going to hurt some of the people that need it the most. Not because of the federal government, it's because of laws in the state that resist the federal government. We also see, it's been talked about ICE. Well, when we look at other states and other areas, even Democrat, like Washington, D.C. or Memphis, which have Democratic mayors, they cooperated with ICE. And guess what? They didn't have the chaos that we had here in Minnesota. So again, it's Governor Walz and the Democrats asking for resistance and violence against ICE that has led to the problems that we see. Other states, even areas where Democrats are in charge that cooperated with the federal government, you didn't see these types of problems. So again, look in the mirror. There's the problem if you voted to resist ICE. We cooperate, we could get the violent criminals off of our streets, have a safer state, safer for our citizens. In fact, the latest statistic that just came out is that we had the lowest murder rate in the nation since 1900, members. We had the lowest murder rate in our nation since 1900. And a lot of those murders happen in minority communities. So you know which president is one of the greatest Black Lives Matter president? President Trump. He has saved more minorities by lowering the murder rate with ICE than any other president. In fact, if we look at the previous president under Biden, we see fentanyl pouring across our border, poisoning and killing over 100,000 of our young people a year. We see over 300,000 children missing, sold into sex exploitation, work exploitation, and a host of other exploitation. Under President Trump, over 145,000 of those children have been found and returned to a safe environment. So members, if you want to point fingers at sexual exploitation of children, you better look at the Democrat presidents. And as far as pedophilia is concerned, this body repealed one of two laws by the Democrats opposing pedophilia in the state of Minnesota. Again, look in the mirror and you see the problem. So members, let's cooperate with the federal government. We will get the federal matches we need that protect and are used for our children, address the fraud. Again, it's Minnesota that has caused these problems, specifically Governor Walz and the Democrats. And I know President Trump has said some things that I probably wouldn't have said. But remember, think of what he's been called. He's been twice tried to assassinate. He's been called all types of names. And sooner or later, we got to tone that rhetoric down. I've tried to do that personally, but calling ICE Nazis and Gestapo and all these other things, and even Governor Walz saying one day he wants to wake up and would be rejoiceful if President Trump was dead. He actually said that. That's the type of rhetoric that we see on both sides that needs to be toned down. So members, this bill puts a Band-Aid on an economic infection. The infection is we have grown government too big, too fast, too soon with taxes, regulations, and mandates. This has restricted new rental property, driving up the cost of rent for everybody else. It has restricted a whole host of other building, like residential building. And on top of that, we put mandates from the Green New Scam on new construction, which has basically brought it almost to a halt in many areas. So what's our solution with this bill? By God, we got to give them more, take money from somebody else and give it over here to try to help these because we're the ones that caused the problem, the state of Minnesota. You need to look no further in terms of ICE, the hurting people with rental, than looking in the mirror and the bills that you passed to create this mess. Vote this down. Let's attack the real problem, the infection of mandates, Green New Scam, and a host of other things that are driving up our cost. Did I say I'm not voting for this bill? I hope so. It's the wrong direction, and it's a one-time money. And the thing is, as soon as it's gone, we're going to be back to the same problems if we don't address the real cause. And again, I have 5 counties, not one of them asked for this help. Please vote no. Let's care about the real citizens and return this state to some economic sanity. This is a good first step. Thank you, Mr. President.
Senator Hurd.
Thank you, Mr. President. This bill, authored by Senator Port, is a big help for people in my area, my district. The homelessness in the East Side St. Paul is growing, and our seniors are at risk paying rent. You know, I'm not going to respond to the comment that's made, but for sure, no one in America on this world want to be homeless, and no one want to be poor. And for the most part, no one want to be jobless. Just a few days ago, I got a text from one of my constituents. His name is Danielle, a hardworking American. I'm sure if I mentioned the name, you probably think he's African American. Yes, hardworking American in East Side St. Paul, running mom and pop restaurant business. And now he struggled because the current political situation that set us back. And he didn't text me about himself, but he texted me for his family in needs. And when he texted me, he said, I do not feel entitled to anything. I do not often ask for help, but this is the first time that my family member are facing homelessness and have difficulty paying rent. You know, in all smooth circumstances, if we are living well in a utopia, maybe nobody die, nobody get hurt, nobody get sick, nobody lose their job, we probably don't need help. But Danielle's family here faced death in his family. Now you have to take care of the death persons that pass away. Over that affect your employment. You lose job. And when you lose job, you have to struggle to pay rent. And I'm glad in this bill also have emergency rental assistance that go back to time of August 31st, 2025. In addition to that, I want to tell us a little story too, because a few stories here I mentioned affect largely resident of East Side St. Paul. In January, you probably seen an article, the Van family escaped from Vietnam no more than 2 years ago as refugee, and were legally coming here. They escaped persecution, religious persecution, because they are Christian. And this Christian family happened to live in my district. Their family were not just persecuted, their family member were incarcerated by their government and hoping that America would be a place for freedom for them. And 2 years ago, the family arrived, trying to enjoy American freedom, finding a job to help their family, raise their family here. In January this year, when ICE came door knocking, and they opened their door, because they're not familiar with how our society operates and what's going on out there. And the wife was taken away to El Paso, Texas, then shortly later thrown in the street of Houston, Texas, where they had no idea, where she had no idea where she was. That must be devastating, traumatizing. And while all the 2 weeks of ordeal, she lost her job as well. And there's no reason why she was arrested, because the family was just working on their green card. And these are people who are legal to be in our country. And add on to the suffering that Ms. Vang faced, not having her job because she's the breadwinner of the family, paying her rent. Almost every day, ICE agent or someone will go door knock with uniform on door knock her house. That terrorized them. And she even tried to figure out how she will break the renter contract. And then where will she be safe to find another rental unit? And this bill will help residents like that. Residents like Danielle's family, who didn't know what we do here. He just randomly text me and call me. He only know that I'm a state senator. He doesn't really know what we do here. But I said, Danielle, maybe pay attention to the debate that I might have a few days from now. So perhaps he's watching. So this is just a few examples. And I don't want to get into the subject of religion so much. But as a new American, well, not so new now, I've been here 49 years. As I see what happened in the street in Minneapolis, I see armed military folks with guns and then pushed against people who blow, whistle, and chant. And some get hurt, some got killed. And may God bless their soul for that. Never expect that that will happen in America. But what I see is similar to Jew and Gentile and Christian stand together fighting against the oppressor. That's my view. And I still feel so welcome being that this is a Christian nation and we should give love to other. And what I see, what happened in the street Minneapolis and East Side St. Paul, where they dragged my cousin in nude. That shouldn't happen. And I see black and brown folks, Norwegian, Scandinavian, blow their whistle, said, don't arrest that man. And if it's not Christian value, I don't know what to say. Thank you, and I wholeheartedly support the yes for Senator Port's bill, and the housing assistance bill would be a big help for my district and many metro part. Thank you.
Senator Western.
Thank you, Mr. President, members. Let's take a little trip down memory lane here and realize how the Democrat Party that's been in charge during the trifecta, been in charge of the Senate. We've had massive fraud problems revealed in our state, fraudsters left and right, daycares that have no students but are charging for phantom students, defrauding the taxpayers. And so what we've got on the Senate floor here today is more evidence that the Democrat Party doesn't get it. Doesn't get that Minnesota has a massive fraud problem. They rush this bill through, raiding $40 million that was set aside for property owners that were in distress and had their properties foreclosed, and counties illegally seizing the equity in their property using state law that's been on the books for decades. And we've had a fund to reimburse those property owners, and they are raiding that here today, rushing a bill through that they couldn't even follow the Senate rules and give a 3-day notice to have parties contribute or offer input so we could address issues of concern. Anybody see a problem going on here? It's like trying to bake some bread and rush it. It'll only rise so fast. And you have to go through ample procedures to have a better product come out in the end. Well, that's what's going on here. Democrats rush through, ignore Senate rules, say it's impracticable to have 3 days notice for people to come to testify and be transparent in committees. Just a week ago, that happened in the Judiciary Committee. Went from taxes to judiciary the same day in violation of the Senate rules, unless it was impracticable. Well, we've got 2 months of session going on yet. It's a stretch to say it was impracticable. But now we've got a so-called finished product by the Democrats with the background of all the fraud that's been revealed in our state this past year. And now they want to pass more legislation quickly that's ripe for fraud. And Republicans brought the amendment forward to say, at least let's restrict fraudsters. And every Democrat voted no. If they've been charged or convicted of fraud, defrauding Minnesotans, Democrats voted that down in such a hasty rush to get this unfinished product raced out the door raiding the $40 million from the fund that's supposed to help property owners that were cheated out of their equity in a foreclosure process. And Democrats' solution is to the fraud problem, let's send more bills out that are unfinished, don't protect against fraudsters, and we'll just hope that it doesn't continue in Minnesota. Hope is no plan to stop the fraudsters, but that's the Democrats' plan. Let's just hope. Hope the fraudsters won't be there to collect this $40 million that we're raiding from the homeowners that were cheated out of their equity on their foreclosed property in Minnesota. So I hope you see a problem with this recipe. There was multiple other amendments voted down. Another amendment said, at least let's make sure it goes to Minnesota residents or legal that are here legally. Let's at least restrict this Minnesota taxpayer money to residents of Minnesota that are either citizens or here with legal status. Democrats voted that down 100%. All Democrats said no, Republicans said yes. These are ways to prevent fraud ignored by the Democrats continually. How long is it going to take them, the Democrats, to admit we really have a fraud problem and rushing bills through this legislature, taking no constructive input, ignoring testifiers in committee? And we're supposed to believe this is a good bill that's going to protect the taxpayers' money and go to the people it's intended for. I'm not buying it, and you shouldn't either. We can do much better, but not as long as the Democrats keep their heads in the sand, rush things through, and use hope as their best defense against fraud. It ain't going to happen. And so, members, I'd urge a no vote on this. Senator Port, you can do much better. You can find the money somewhere else. You don't have to steal it from the homeowners. But put some guardrails in place that would at least say the fraudsters don't get another crack at Minnesota money that gets handed out. $40 million. That's ripe for more fraud. Available for illegal immigrants that are here illegally. And the problem is, that means Minnesota residents, hardworking as they are, get less money because the residents that are citizens or have legal residence here get less of this money if it was to pass the House of Representatives too. Because those here illegally are going to get their share of this pot under the Democrat plan. More free money for people here illegally at the expense of hardworking Minnesota citizens. Free health care, free food if you're here illegally. But if you're here as a Minnesota citizen with legal residence, you get to go to the back of the line because we're going to spend this money for those that are here illegally, those that have committed fraud to the state. This is an easy no vote. The Senate can do much better work than this, and we can start that new day by voting no and putting the Senate on a much stricter path to protecting the taxpayers and quit using hope as our strategy to not be defrauded anymore, as the Democrats are putting forth today.
Senator Dibble.
Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you, members. I rise today in strong support of Senator Port's bill, Senate File 3596, to provide emergency rental and utility assistance to Minnesotans who are struggling to keep a roof over their heads. Mr. President, before I get further into my comments, I just want to invite our colleagues to spend some time maybe visiting with the people we're talking about. I want to just share with you a little bit about a family that my family supports. I go to a Catholic church, and this church is supporting the volunteers. The members of our congregation are supporting 138 families with our time and our resources and our efforts on their behalf. We have 185 volunteers who are engaged in that work. Mr. President, members, I could not be more proud of the people of Minneapolis, the people of Minnesota, who are standing up for each other in what can be characterized as a time of just almost unbelievable crisis foisted upon us by our own federal government. Mr. President, members, the family we support, a mom with 3 kids, kind, hardworking, loving, and scared out of their minds, traumatized by what they've experienced in their lives and the lives of their friends and family and people that they go to school with. They weren't taking anyone's instruction to stay home. They don't even want to go outside to get their mail or take out their garbage. They feel trapped in their own home because they feel endangered by the actions of their own government. And Mr. President, I don't know what my colleagues are talking about when they say there's no issue, there's no crisis, because the county commissioner hasn't called them up or the county administrator hasn't called them up. I would invite all of you to just go out into your community and talk to your neighbors and friends. We are facing a housing affordability crisis of historic proportions. Nearly half of renter households in Minnesota are cost burdened, spending more than 30% of their income to keep a roof over their heads. More than a quarter are spending over half of what they earn just to stay housed, and seniors on fixed incomes are sometimes spending as much as 73% of what they take in to keep a roof over their head. Members, 1 in 5 families are struggling to afford their food, and seniors are being hit the hardest. And let's just be honest about what is driving this economic pain. Federal actions have sent the cost of everyday life skyrocketing. Tariffs alone are costing every single household, have already cost every single household in this state $1,700 more per year. Utility bills are rising. Thank you, President Trump. Gas prices are rising. Thank you, President Trump, for this quagmire of a war he's leading us into. Groceries are rising, and this aggressive federal immigration enforcement, hardly law enforcement, is more like a military action with all the uniforms and weapons and tools. President, I urge everyone's support for Senate File 3596. We see with our eyes. We know what's happening. No rhetoric in this floor, no handouts full of hot language can dissuade us from our solemn vow and our solemn mission. Thank you, Mr. President.
Senator Holmstrom.
Mr. President, members, I rise in opposition to this Rent for Riots bill, a $40 million pilfering of taxpayer money. I agree with the author. Nothing in Minnesota is affordable right now. Democrats just spent through a $17 billion surplus, an unprecedented overtaxing of our citizens. The majority then raised spending by 40% and increased the tax burden by another $10 billion, $6,900 per Minnesota family. Again, I agree with the author. Affordability is a real issue in Minnesota, but nothing has gotten more unaffordable for Minnesota families than the cost of running government. We need to have a conversation about personal responsibility in this chamber. Not every problem warrants a government solution. The hardworking, tax-paying families in this state work tirelessly to meet their financial obligations. It is now unconscionable for us to apply a new burden that hands their money to illegal aliens, sex offenders, and somehow even convicted fraudsters. I ask for your vote no on this bill. Thank you.
Senator Marty.
Thank you, Mr. President. First, I want to thank Senator Port for the amazing work on this bill. It's critically important. And I think she mentioned earlier in her opening remarks about how the funding came here as a result of Geraldine Tyler, who had to fight back against a government that acted illegally, taking away her home and her assets. That's why the legislature had to fund what we've now since called the Tyler settlement. And I hope and believe Mrs. Tyler would be pleased that we're taking the balance of those settlement funds and using it to help other people who have been assaulted in many cases and terrorized by their own government. People who had to stay home from work because of that. I was told by one of the speakers earlier that some people were encouraging others to stay home from work. I was one of them. Afghani refugee family who fled Afghanistan with no notice because they had served the US military, and when the country left, they had to flee for their lives. A woman in that family who works at a hospital needed rides to get to work. She was so terrified, lawfully here, so terrified to leave her home, she needed people to get to work. Got a call from her one night at the hospital because ICE had come to the hospital, and the hospital administrators were saying, we can't guarantee people's safety, so make yourself scarce and hide. And she hid in the restroom for a couple hours. The terror is real. I know of others, American citizens, lifelong American citizens, but whose ethnicity or race isn't the same of most of us in this chamber, who was targeted because of that, who was able, fortunately, to work from home for a couple months because of the terror of going out. Oh yes, if she was arrested improperly or assaulted, she'd probably be released in an hour, maybe a day, worse, maybe a couple days. But when you see how people were roughed up and how they were treated and assaulted, agents who did things that if any Minnesota law enforcement agent did them would be fired. Rodney King in Los Angeles 25, 30 years ago made national news for weeks because how he was brutally assaulted by law enforcement. Law enforcement doesn't do that anymore. But when you see people, not because there's a suspicion of them other than their race, where ICE, you've seen the videos where they when you put them into that, and they ask you, should I go to work? I know employers who were telling their employees stay home because they knew the risk was too great. So just like the reason we had to put money into the Tyler settlement, because in that case, state and local governments did illegal actions against Minnesotans. In this case, where the federal government is assaulting people in ways that no law enforcement agency would get away with. Assaulting people, they didn't even know who they were in most cases. They had to ask them for identification to prove who they were so they could know if it was okay to arrest them. What we had was the most shameful assault on civil liberties I've ever seen. And when our government, our own government, hurts people like that, we have an obligation to make sure they don't lose their housing because they couldn't go to work because it wasn't safe to. And the terror, maybe some people in this room don't know what that terror is like, but I can assure you, when lifelong Minnesota residents are scared to go to work because they see what's happening to other neighbors, that's real. And I'm not ashamed of telling them to stay home from work when you're scared for your life. And I'm really proud that Senator Port is taking people who are struggling to pay for their housing, and recognizing when the government does a wrong to people, we have an obligation as a government to make it right again. Thank you, Senator Port. I urge your support for the bill.
Senator Rest, and she'll be followed by Senator Lucero. Senator Rest.
Thank you, Mr. President. When I go to sleep at night, I am angry. When I wake up in the morning, I'm angry, and I can't believe that I've ever slept. But today is almost like no other day in this Senate, and I am so privileged to be a member. I'm grateful for Senator Port and her shining example of what it means to be a servant leader. I am not angry when I sit here in this chamber, listening to everyone, not getting up, not looking at my phone, but listening to you speak your minds, speak from your heart in a celebration of our Constitution. This bill started out with a promise. That promise has been fulfilled with this bill. And I promised myself, again, that I would listen to everyone's voice as you and your constituents deserve. Each in your own way, and I am so appreciative of it, has contributed to the success of this bill, of this effort, and it's going to pass. it's going to pass. The dollars that are being used arose from a righteous purpose that has been celebrated today in the life of Mrs. Tyler. And that purpose today continues on for the people of Minnesota. When I see the vote on that board, I will be so grateful, not just to my colleagues, but the great and generous spirit of all the people of our wonderful state. On behalf of my family and myself, I am so grateful for the actions of this Senate as we pass that challenge to the Minnesota House and ask them to do likewise. My family and I are so proud to call ourselves people of this land, this Minnesota. Thank you, Mr. President.
Senator Lucero, then will be followed by Senator Pop.
Thank you, Mr. President. I am wondering if the bill author would yield for a question.
Senator Port, will you yield? She will yield. Senator Lucero.
Thank you, Mr. President, and thank you, Senator Port. I was wondering if you have any estimates on how long the $40 million in the bill will last at rates of applications for rental assistance.
Senator Port to the question.
Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you for that question, Senator Lucero. The information that we have, and part of the reason that I know it was mentioned that this bill changed costs throughout the process, is because the information that we received from Greater Twin Cities United Way, who runs the 211 hotline, estimates that for the course of the next 3 months, there is a need for $75 million in rental assistance. We know that this isn't enough, but this was a revenue neutral portion that we could move right now as we continue to discuss the other choices that we make through the legislative process.
Senator Lucero.
Thank you, Mr. President, and thank you, Senator Port. If she would yield for another question.
Senator Port, will you yield? She will yield. Senator Lucero.
Thank you, Mr. President, and thank you, Senator Port. My next question, Senator Port, is I would draw your attention to line 5.21. It says that this section expires the last day of the 4th month following the month of the effective date. And my question is, let's just say this were to be signed into law this month, the month of March. Does the month of March count as the 1st month? In which case, the last day would be June, I think? Or would it be the next month? Would it be April, in which the last day of the month of July? If she would clarify, if it was enacted this month, when would the last day be?
Senator Port to the question.
Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you, Senator Lucero. If it is both passes the House and signed in this month, March would be the 1st month.
Senator Lucero.
Okay, thank you, Mr. President. So there's an estimated $75 million for the next 90 days, I think is what I heard, of need out there. And that's all I'm going to ask of Senator Port to yield. So there's an estimated $75 million of rental assistance needed for the next 3 months. And so the dollar amount in this bill is approximately half that. So there's going to be roughly 6 weeks. And if we go back to the last time we had a rental assistance bill passed during the COVID era, the assistance dollars were exhausted incredibly fast. So we have the moratorium that's in this bill is going to last for 4 months in terms of the 30-day requirement for a pre-notice. And yet the funds are likely going to be exhausted within a month or a month and a half, I would estimate, if that. And as I've read the bill, I don't see any requirement in here that somebody that is receiving the moratorium, the eviction moratorium, even has to apply for the rental assistance. And so there will be people out there that have no intention of applying for assistance, but are simply going to create a hardship for their housing provider by not paying rent and then not being able to be evicted. I remember during the COVID era and the last time there was a moratorium, many constituents called me. There is an idea that a housing provider is some multi-million-dollar company. But the constituents that called me, they are mom and pop. They might own an extra house. It might be a duplex. They might be renting out their basement to a tenant. And so I've heard the conversations taking place here about this is going to save us money. It's going to save the state money. Spending or saving money now will save us more money than would otherwise be spent in the future. But Mr. President, this is other people's money. This is the money of the taxpayers. And when I compare those phone calls I received the last time this rental assistance or a rental assistance was put out there and a moratorium was put in place, there was a single mom who called me and she was crying because it was just her and her kids who owned another house. She had one house. And when the moratorium was put in place, the tenant who was there at the time stopped paying rent and had no intention to apply and didn't apply, as far as I understand, for any assistance. They abused the process.
And that single mom asked me what she should do. And I couldn't provide her any answers. Because you can't force the tenant to apply, but yet they can force that single mom to have to house them and pay their bills, paying their excessive usage of electricity, excessive usage of water. And that is what is so angering about this. Democrats claiming that they are saving money and that they're helping Minnesotans when they're actually confiscating other people's property, putting restrictions in place, and forcing housing providers to pay the bills of others who may have zero intention of applying for these incredibly limited funds. I also look at this bill, and I don't see any requirement in here that there be proactive, affirmative steps to ensure and protect against fraud. We know in this day and age, and we know that there is fraud running rampant throughout this state. The ability to manufacture a lease and then to manufacture claiming that they're a tenant between two friends, applying for rental assistance. Minnesotans do not trust government and the lack of checks and balances that are in here to protect against fraud. I've heard stories characterizing the attacking of law enforcement, the rioting that we saw. We saw criminal rioters surrounding hotels, banging on drums, banging and breaking windows, committing criminal damage to property. Characterizations of these illegal checkpoints that are stood up in the middle of roads in Minneapolis. Law-abiding citizens that are going about their business, visiting family, perhaps trying to get to a job, they are illegally being stopped by these criminal thugs at these makeshift checkpoints. And the characterization on this floor today that those that were engaging in this criminal behavior are beautiful. The Democrats on this floor characterize such behavior as they responded beautifully. What this is lawlessness. Lawlessness. In fact, this month, the socialists attempted a rent strike, actively organizing against those that are simply trying to provide good housing. That is a manufactured crisis provoked and promoted by Democrats. The lawlessness of attempting to normalize illegal behavior, such as taxpayer-provided health care, taxpayer-permitted driver's license for illegal immigrants, taxpayer-funded college tuition paid for to illegals, is attracting them to this state. Then, when laws that are already on the books are simply enforced that previously had not been enforced, that's not an attack by the federal government. That's not any of the false characterizations that Democrats have claimed. Instead, it is promoting lawlessness. In the last riots that Minneapolis had several years ago, I toured some of these immigrant businesses along University Avenue. I know Senator Coran, if I remember correctly, was there. I don't remember. It was a group of legislators. And I distinctly remember the story that was heartbreaking as we went from business to business, listening to the business owners' testimony of their experiences of fear as these rioters broke into their businesses. And in one particular instance, again, along University Avenue there, he didn't even speak English. I cannot remember what country he was from. But he described, it was a clothing store. He described how he was at his business that night, and these rioters came into his business. He had worked for 30 years, if I remember correctly. Because the country he came from, he didn't trust the banking system, he didn't trust the government. He had his life savings in a safe in the basement of that business. He had the title to his house. He had everything that he has accumulated and worked so hard for. These criminal rioters came in, provoked and encouraged by Democrats, by the way, stormed into his business, stole everything that he had in inventory, broke into that safe, and stole his life savings. As he was describing that for us, he had the translator there, he began to cry. That's what I remember. That's the lawlessness that the Democrats encouraged then and the lawlessness that they encouraged today. The Signal Chat, the organization, this is not an organic swelling up of people. These are lawless thugs that are taking advantage, and they are creating fear in law-abiding citizens. In the bill that was debated, we had several amendments, and they were voted down. Why were those amendments voted down? Because Democrats are proudly redistributing wealth to illegal immigrants. Democrats, they voted down the amendment that would have prohibited tax dollars from going to those that are convicted or charged of committing fraud. Democrats voted down the Republican amendment that would have prohibited these funds from going to sexual predators. Mr. President, this is not what Minnesotans want. Minnesotans don't think lawlessness is beautiful. Minnesotans don't think that these criminals, these sexual predators, these illegal immigrants should be able to stay in their house and not be evicted. We are creating a moral hazard here in Minnesota. Because the government, because Democrats continue to spend taxpayer dollars on assistance program after assistance program after assistance program, people are becoming acclimated and accustomed to government constantly bailing them out. People make the conscious decision not to work hard, not to sacrifice, not to set that alarm for 5 a.m., to get up and fulfill their responsibilities for their own family. Instead, they'll say, Democrats will just bail us out. In fact, let's take the day off. Let's go blow whistles at ear-piercing sounds in the ears of our law enforcement professionals. Let's put them at danger. And then let's go and we'll do this socialist rent strike. And the Democrats will allow, well, they'll pass the moratorium so we can't be evicted, and then they'll pay for our rent. People are being conditioned with the false expectation that government will bail them out. So friends, there are good people that are certainly struggling, but they are struggling not because of some of these false claims you've heard. They are struggling because of the policies that the Democrats have passed in the last number of years that are driving up property taxes, that are being passed along in the cost of goods and services, that are making Minnesota less affordable. This does nothing to solve the root cause of the unaffordability in Minnesota. Mr. President, I highly encourage a red vote on this so that we can have some serious bills that actually tackle what Minnesotans want. Thank you.
Senator Parr, followed by Senator Johnson Stewart.
Thank you, Mr. President. I stand in support of this bill. I want to share a story of a family, a man that's in my district. His name is Vane. Vane came to the United States legally as a child refugee more than 40 years ago. When Operation Metro Surge began last year, everything changed for Vane's family. He saw people taken by ICE, separated from their families. He began to feel that any chance encounter with ICE could separate him from his family and children. Vane became afraid to leave his home and go anywhere, afraid to go to work. For the first time in 20 years, he was afraid to go to work. He has been a paying tax member for 20 years. So the idea that people who need this assistance don't work, don't pay property taxes, or don't pay state taxes, and that they're just lazy is absolutely offensive. To these taxpayers, falling behind on hard times is something that they did not want, whether they were illegal immigrants or citizens. When 7 out of 10 households all across Minnesota, including rural communities, are living paycheck to paycheck, sudden loss of income, whether it's because of federal ICE operations, the loss of a job, an unexpected medical expense, or a family emergency, their housing stability quickly becomes at risk. And when housing becomes unstable, everything else in a family's life, especially children's lives, become unstable too. And those have very many negative and serious rippling effects. So our responsibilities as legislators are clear: to help keep families housed, children safe, and communities strong. Mr. President and members, we need to pass this bill because families across Minnesota, our constituents, are depending on us to do so. Thank you.
Senator Johnson Stewart.
Thank you, Mr. President. First, I want to go on record as saying that I attended many peaceful protests and have not spit on anyone, nor has anyone heard about the rising cost of gas just since President Trump
more before going to Senator Port. I want to make sure that I didn't forget anyone, and so no one comes to me and says I ignored them. I'm now going to Senator Muhammad. You okay? All right, Senator Port.
Thank you, Mr. President. Members, I want to correct a few things. First, there is no eviction moratorium in this bill. There never has been. There is a notice required that is now 30 days instead of 14 days, but it's no eviction moratorium. I also want to note that we are on track, but 2025 was the year we had the most eviction filings in the history of the state of Minnesota. That's not a good stat to be in line with. It's also only at that level to be in line with. It's also only at that level because of the incredible generosity of Minnesotans who have raised millions of dollars to keep their families, their neighbors safely, stably housed. This funding ensures that our neighbors, families, seniors, and children have the stability that they need to remain safely in their homes. And not just Minnesotans in my district or in the metro. The housing crisis and the affordability crisis foisted upon us by this federal government is statewide. Greater Minnesota saw a 53% increase in unsheltered homelessness. When people are experiencing homelessness in Greater Minnesota, and especially in small communities, they are struggling more than anywhere else in the state to find shelter. In the district represented by the Senate from Lonsdale, there are 4,155 renter households, and 43% are cost burdened, paying more than 30% of their income. 17.5% are paying more than half their income on rent. In the district represented by the senator from Lakeville, there are 3,329 renter households, 46% of whom pay more than 30%, and 30% of whom pay more than 50% of their income on rent. In the district represented by the senator from Little Falls, there are 5,774 renters, with 41% of them paying more than 30%, and 18% severely cost burdened by spending over half their income. In the district represented senator from Glencoe, there are 6,200 renters, and 38% of them are cost burdened, 20% severely cost burdened. In the area represented by the senator from St. Michael, there are 4,192 renters. Over a third of them cannot afford their rent, and 12.5 of them spend more than half of their income on rent. In the area represented by the senator from Madison Lake, there are 6,800 renter households, and a massive 42.5% of them spend more than 30% of their income on rent. 15% spend more than half of their money to keep a roof over their heads. In Mazeppa and surrounding areas represented by a senator who has never met a hungry person, there are 6,765 renters, and 42% of them pay more than 30% of their income on rent. And finally, in the district represented by the senator from Faribault, there are 8,122 renters, and a staggering 54% of them spend more than 30% of their income on rent, and almost quarter of them spend more than 50%. You may not have heard from your counties. Some of you have said this is not a priority of any of my counties. But in the district represented by the senator who said that, Rice County has asked for assistance from the cities in the district. The CDA came to Faribault and Northfield and asked for assistance for rent help. Northfield passed $50,000 in rental assistance to give to the county. Counties are asking for this. Our friends are asking for this. Our neighbors are asking for this. I don't know who some of my colleagues are talking about when they talk about referencing. What I know, workers with whistles and grandmas with Costco accounts standing up, helping people stay safe and stable. Mr. President and members, I appreciate the robust discussion we've had today. I want to bring us back to the reason for this bill. Minnesotans need our help. They need us to make good policy decisions that help Minnesotans all, kids and seniors, veterans and survivors of domestic violence, workers and retirees, putting the resources that we have available towards renters who are struggling in an unprecedented crisis is good policy. Preventing evictions and homelessness is good policy. And I do want to take a moment to say thank you to those Minnesotans who stepped up and raised millions of dollars in mutual aid to help keep our communities stable until we could come back to session and respond as a state. We have heard the warnings from housing organizations who see a tidal wave of evictions loom. Avoid the trauma of homelessness, and we prevent the need for more costly interventions down the line. We are standing up for Minnesotans. This is the first DFL bill to address affordability this session, but it will not be the last. We hear you, and we are responding. I hope that this is an easy vote. I hope you vote green.
Secretary will take the roll on final passage as amended to Senate File 3596. Senator Bowden, for those voting for Carlson, votes aye.
And Senator Verbatim votes aye.
And Senator Verbatim votes aye. Senator Jasinski, for those voting pursuant to Rule 40.7.
Thank you, Mr. President. Senator Coleman votes no.
Senator Coleman votes no.
Senator Miller votes no.
Senator Miller votes no.
Senator Coran votes no.
Senator Coran votes no.
Senator Weber votes no.
Senator Weber votes no.
Senator Heinzman votes no.
Senator Heitzman votes no.
And thank you, Mr. President. Senator Johnson votes no.
And Senator Johnson votes no. All senators having voted who desires to vote, the secretary will close the roll. There have been 35 ayes and 32 nays. The bill is passed and its title agreed to.